What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Pavalli, joined by my certified fantabulist, perpetually loyal co-host, Grant Hughes. We're here to talk NBA playoffs. Nick Nurse going live on a Friday just to get this out there. Well, it's not a bonus pod, but we don't really record on Fridays ever because everything's outdated. No one listens to podcasts over the weekend. We're trusting you, our loyal, lovely listeners, that you're going to download this episode. Anyway, before we get started, though, how are you doing, Grant?
Super good. We're in playoff mode, hence the Friday podcast. We just, we work twice as hard, but also it's shorts weather here in California, Dan. We got a high of 81 today, which makes my mood go like through the roof because we've had a shitty, extra long winter. And I am very happy that the sun is out and we're in the middle of the playoffs. So, or the middle of the first round. So all good things right now.
It's shorts weather here in New York as well, too. And I am wearing shorts, but I'm still wearing a sweatshirt because I just get cold all the time in my house. But I am ecstatic as well. I'm super good, as you put it. Not only because I'm joined by you, but I am living in a raccoon-free environment.
Are we gonna? Okay, I wasn't gonna bring it up. I'm so glad we have Dan. Can we talk about the raccoons?
We're still waiting for people to trickle in here, and so I feel like we're too businessy anyway. Sometimes we're like we don't talk about. Some people don't like long intros, but fuck it at this point. So I recently moved into a house. I purchased it. I understand that I'm very lucky and that it was probably also a stupid decision when you look at the market, yada, yada, yada. We closed in November. We had an inspection. Everything turned out fine. About a month ago, we heard some noise like in the ceiling from the first floor. And then our dogs on the second floor started like they were tracking something in the floor. So clearly something's going on in between.
Never a good sign. Never a good sign.
Right. And so we were recommended to somebody who had his own company. He comes and says, "Oh, you have a squirrel. I can see a little hole in your attic. I will catch him or them, set them free, and like you'll be done with this. But we have to leave the hole open because you want them, if they're in the house, to be able to get out. And if you do close up the hole, then you're going to either have a dead animal in your house or they'll come through the normal house." This guy ghosted us because we kept hearing the noise and it was getting like louder. Then, and I've been told they're called, did you know of anything called a soffing?
No, but I just want to say, just before you go any farther, I'm sorry that I find this so funny, but the specifics, okay, I don't want to step on this. Please continue because I'm going to try to hold it together.
So a soffing is basically this, like the siding ceiling of like your patio or porches. So we have like a very nice deck or patio in our front yard and then a side one. Both of these things are coming down, like something heavy had been stepping on it. So we eventually had to call another guy. He comes, goes into our attic, and he was like, he's up there for 10 seconds. He goes, "Oh, you have raccoons." And I'm like, I'm deathly afraid of raccoons.
Oh, I didn't know that. Now I feel worse.
Scare the shit out of me. I think it's because like they've not jumped out at me, but like they've made me jump when I'm taking the trash out in the dark because they'll be by garbage cans. Now I'm floored because we've never had in this house any issues with our garbage. We live next one of our neighbors. It's clearly a rental house. There's like 2 or 3 families living there. They throw out their garbage without garbage cans. Like it's just in these bags, never been torn open. And I'm up all hours. So I brought the garbage out at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever. So I'm just miffed. We have raccoons. And so he's like, that you could see they've torn up your insulation in the attic. They've tuned through wiring in the attic, which is also why we have central air and then ductless. We have a ductless system in our garage that stopped working all of a sudden. Guess what? That's why it stopped working. They came, he says it looks like one of them fell through the soffing here. So like that outside ceiling, I'll call it. And there's insulation popping out of the sides. Now, this is all, we have dogs. And so we're worried about the raccoons encountering the dogs.
Yeah.
It gets worse because 2 things are happening. We're recording this Friday night. We're having our first real gathering at the house. Like 20 people are coming over, our friends, most of which we haven't seen in like months. So that's about to get canceled. And then he tells us, now the only reason they would be inside, because it's not even cold. What is happening? And he was like, well, you see that big hole in your roof? There's a huge hole, by the way, in our roof. Just this huge hole, just straight into the attic. It's rained, and there's this huge hole. We were told it was a tiny one. raccoons are apparently super strong, can get through plywood, the shingles. He was like, you can tell they were determined to get in here. They're about to give birth.
Oh my
And so I'm like,
God.
you've
It's
got to be
unbelievable.
kidding me. So I'm like, meanwhile, he opens the attic and he's up there. He's like, oh, it's raccoons. Like, hopefully they don't shoot down the. So I jump. We have a treadmill in the garage that I jump on top of the treadmill and I'm like peeled against the wall because I'm so nervous. So we move out, which is why it looked like I had been kidnapped the other day on the intro of this podcast. We move out, staying with my in-laws because we were worried about the dogs. We were worried about Dan, quite frankly. And he was like, they're not living up here yet. They're just setting up a nest. He goes, I think they're living under your shed, because he pointed out a hole in the shed. And he's like, they're sleeping there and they're coming up here. And so they are outside. So we moved and they set up a trap on, I think it was Tuesday. Wednesday morning, there's this giant ass raccoon in the trap. It was a humane trap. I want to make that clear. We care. I felt bad, to be honest with you. We felt bad.
Yeah.
Even as much as I hate raccoons. There's just this, it's the size of, I don't know if you've ever seen my dogs, but Wade is like 27, 30 pounds and just very long and tall and big. And the raccoon was like the size of him. I don't know how big raccoons are supposed to get.
That seems too big for a raccoon to me. That's alarmingly large for a raccoon.
It was the female raccoon who was still pregnant.
Hey, good.
So no baby raccoons. We're actually allowed to still have the gathering at our house, and they feel confident enough that they patched up the hole in the roof. Now we just have to, my final element of this story, and this is where I think you can start to feel a little bad for me. I know that we're very fortunate to have a home, to have someplace to go. It cost us, the one guy who ghosted us, we paid him $250 to start. That's just gone. This cost us $1,600. And there's probably about another few $1,000s worth of damage just in the attic to the elect. And I don't even know. First of all, I didn't even know what soffing was. He's talking to me. He must think that I'm like this actual masculine guy. And I'm like, what the? I've never heard that word in my life. So needless to say, we are both, our house is raccoon free. So I'm very excited. The dogs are going to move back in a couple of days. We just want to make sure. But I'm also, thousands and thousands of dollars poor now.
I gotta say, great. First of all, great story. Well told. Just terrific arc. The whole thing. Well done. I do feel bad now because I have to tell you, I've only given you like a couple texts about it after you told me, mostly joking or like giving you a hard time about it. I do feel bad because that does suck. That's like a real life disruptor. But good. Like, that's just like, have you considered that first guy like might have just stuffed a raccoon in there just like for fun? And there was actually a squirrel until he got there. And that's why he didn't show up after that. That's what
they can tell how many animals they think were up there based off the feces that was littered throughout.
Oh, good.
There.
Yes. So there's another layer.
That's how they knew it was raccoons, by the way, is because that's what they saw. And so it's funny because you're texting me. The only things you said about making fun of me, like, is we're about to stream last night for Bleacher Report. You're like, hey, no raccoons behind you or anything.
I think what I said was, Dan, there are 27 raccoons behind you. Do not turn around.
And look, he started, and I'm sure this was to build it up, but he was telling us stories about how if raccoons are determined, they will get inside your house, which is also why we moved as well. Cause we just we're obsessed with our dogs. And so I'm obsessed with me. And so like, that was the other part of the reason.
I mean, I would be obsessed with not having a bunch of pregnant raccoons in my house. Like that's I feel like you're on steady ground there in terms of your reaction to this whole thing. Cause that's like, I mean, imagine, you know what? Timing wise, you probably got, I mean, not great overall, but if you were not that far away from having like a lot more raccoons in your house. So, glass half full, I guess. I don't know. That's just unbelievable.
That is the longest winded intro, not related to basketball, we've ever had, but yeah. it was, but needless to say, it's been a very emotional week in the Valley house.
I mean, more good news. Like if your dogs are acting all crazy and, tracking things around the house that you can't see, could have been a ghost. Your house could have been possessed. So I guess the fact that you can, you can't, at least it was like a real thing that you got out of there.
I was mad at them a little bit. I was like, you guys don't keep this stuff away. Like, what's the point of having you two literally contribute nothing to the household other than hugs and kisses, which are very valuable, but It's like, great. You alerted us after the fact. Hooray. And you didn't keep it away, but they feel confident enough that I don't know how the male female relationship works with raccoons, but they seem to think by this point, if the mail was hanging around, he would have been caught already. So we are, as of right now, raccoon free. Hopefully they didn't tell any of their friends. But I need to know why they chose us. Is still what I don't know. I have to ask is, why did you dig through shingles, plywood, whatever's like roofs are made of? I don't fucking know. And it's a huge hole too. It had to fit a raccoon, but it's just, we stared out the window of one of the bedrooms and it's just this gaping hole into our house.
I mean, kind of a compliment. There's lots of houses in your neighborhood. Yours was the best birthing suite that a raccoon could ask for. So I guess, I'm just looking for positives here, because that's a really shitty story.
Anytime I hear a noise, I jump.
Oh,
and so it's just,
yeah, I think you're in for like 10 years of that now. Everything is going to be a raccoon in your mind now. That's just how you're going to live.
Do you know what I'm not terrified of?
What's that?
Talking about
great segues.
So before we dive into just some playoff takeaways, we have a raccoon comment. Thank you, Alan. We love you. I used to have a raccoon, tough little characters, and escape artist. I could go on. I was told, and this is beforehand, that they're just super smart, and I did not know they have like mega human strength either if they put their minds to it. So
now you do.
Before we get into playoff stuff, the Toronto Raptors fired Nick Nurse. I thought it was interesting that was the language that was used. Just because normally it's parting of the ways, but I don't know if you saw any of the comments coming out of Masai's presser. He like unloaded on the culture, what it was this past season and how it needed to improve, and it wasn't what they were about. So, and then based off what Nick Nurse said before one of the pregame availabilities about he needs to evaluate his own future, it doesn't seem like this was the cleanest of endings.
No, that was like, I didn't see all of Masai's comments, so maybe I'd be interested in what you thought were the main, the most incendiary or the most like sort of noteworthy sections of that. But from the moment Nurse was saying, I think he also said, in addition to, I'm going to take some time to kind of, reassess whatever, I think he also talked about like, this has been, 10 years is a pretty good run. I'm paraphrasing, but it definitely felt like he was past tensing his Raptors tenure a little bit, or at least like, opening up the possibility that like, I think we both know we're done there. So I guess I'll ask you, and I feel like I know the answer. Is there anything that's surprising about this? Because it did seem like things were kind of lining up, and that's excluding, any comments from parties involved, just like the play of the team, right? Like, we've spent all this time this season talking about how the Raptors are just very much the same in terms of what's wrong with how they're playing as they were last year. And so that always felt to me like I think I'll throw it to you. Like, anything surprising, or could you see this coming even before the comments?
I think we could see it coming, but when you started to go through the list of jobs that could be available this summer, I think the Raptors were definitely higher up there on the list. It just felt fait accompli after Nick Nurse's pregame availability. I will say, while neither of us are surprised, I don't know how you necessarily feel about the decision in the context of, do I think Nick Nurse did a great job? I look at some of the minutes distributions, how uniform Toronto's offense and defense felt at time, where it's like they couldn't play these different ways. And then I look at the roster and I'm like, well, what else was he really supposed to do? And so I don't think he was necessarily perfect, but was this roster actually built to be any better than it was this season? And we have the benefit of hindsight. I think both of us, I know I was high on the Raps. I think I picked them to win 48 games or whatever it was. And so clearly I misread the situation. I'm wondering if, as much responsibility as Nick Nurse clearly deserves, and if there are problems behind the scenes with he was clashing with players, you're done as the coach. Like, you're done. But this also sort of feels like not a move of desperation. That's not how Masai acts, but misappropriated blame a little bit, because he might have been like one of the biggest issues. I think the roster construction and this vision might be the greater issue.
Yeah, I've been in the bag for the Raptors for a while. I think they're always one of those teams that we just sort of thought was, I guess one of the ways to frame this is they felt like they underachieved. So I guess in answer to your question about the roster, I always liked the experiment. And I think we overblow it a little bit, because it's not like they always had 5 guys out there that don't have a position and were 6'7" to 6'9", but they did that a lot. It was very much a concerted effort to kind of see what that could get you. And the only thing we know for sure is it could get you a lot of opponent turnovers and you don't turn it over, but your offense stagnates and you suck in the half court because you don't really have a conventional point guard or you don't have a pick and roll attack consistently. But I always liked the idea of it. And I sort of associated that kind of, let's be on the vanguard of what basketball will look like, kind of innovation, I guess you'd call it, positionally or whatever. I kind of associated that with Nurse a little bit because of the sheen of like the box and one in the finals against Curry and these weird defensive things he would try. And I think one of the most complicated things about Nurse is that in conjunction with like what I say is a disappointing couple of years that we're short on, tactical innovation and whatever else, like you got the start of his career as a head coach where that like he was coach of the year. He won a title. Like he was defined by being like, this guy is on the cutting edge. He's really creative. He's the mad scientist. Like he came up in, I think in Houston, right. With their then D-League team that basically shot threes and nothing else. And that spilled into how the Houston Rockets played. Like, so he definitely has the pedigree of a guy who is just willing to tinker and had a lot of success with, I guess, uncommon ideas. But then you weigh that against how much of a flop, strategically these past couple seasons have been. And I don't know how to evaluate his legacy or how he's viewed in the coaching or, league-wide community. I guess the fact that he's already like very much on the short list for the Rockets job and will probably have his choice of others if he wants them, suggests that he's the former, like the first half of his head coaching career is probably getting a lot of weight, which I don't think that's necessarily unfair, but he's going to be an interesting, I think this next job for him is really going to be telling because you do have two sides of a coin that are awfully different after these couple of years. But yeah, not surprised ultimately, but he's just it's an interesting case. And you know what the other thing is, like say the Raptors basically keep the same team together, which they don't have a lot of great options other than doing that with Van Vliet and Gary Trent Jr. having player options. And then you probably got to bring Pirtle back. If they're just better next year,
I would say, because you gave up a 2024 first to get him.
Right. So the roster may not be very different. So maybe we will just get like a good comparison, change the coach, keep the players, see what's different next season. So yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting going forward to see how that looks.
For what it's worth, it seems like that's how Ujiri was leaning, how you framed it. This is just going to be the roster. He said one of the things that stood out, this is per Michael Grange, watching this team play this year was not us. I did not enjoy watching this team play. We believe in the players we have, but whether it's tweaks or major changes, we'll look at everything. All the things we stood for here, the culture, we lacked this year. And so that, I'm making inferences here, leads me to believe that he still believes in the roster. That's why you give up a first-round pick for Jakob Poeltl and the overall vision, and that he really thinks hiring a different coach. And it seems like it might be Ime Udoka, unless they were just letting that out to see what the reaction was, which I do believe in redemption and atonement. We just still don't know enough of the details under how this inappropriate relationship and activity toward a female Celtics employee went to know, like, okay, well, has he atoned for? Like, what is he trying to redeem himself from? So it makes me uncomfortable. But from the basketball side of things, it does very much seem like the Raptors. And I think we could always assign this belief to them, because why would you give up a first-round pick at the trade deadline if you didn't believe in the core of this team? But I think Ujiri kind of etched that in stone where, yeah, if the right blockbuster trade opportunity comes along, but this very much clearly to me, and not that we ever thought it was, but based off what he said, this is not a we might rebuild or really try and retool situation. This is a coaching and culture was the predominant problem, which I don't agree with, by the way, but that seems like how the Raptors are viewing it.
I think, first of all, I don't begrudge Ujiri for feeling like the roster is not necessarily the problem, because he put it together and it's easy to cast blame downward on the coach. But he may be right. The other thing is, like, if the culture wasn't what you wanted it to be, I think you got to focus on like who was actually setting the culture. And I don't know if that's Nurse, because this is a team that, Kyle Lowry is an iconic franchise player for that team, and he's been gone. I think Marc Gasol was a big deal. They had Danny Green during that title run too. You've got all these guys who they're the types of guys you want around to set the culture. And Kawhi was the reason they won the title. I don't know if he's a culture setter, but like the personnel is dramatically different and it's younger. and you tie that up with kind of Scotty Barnes' work ethic concerns that Ujiri talked around a little bit, the clip that I saw. So I don't know that it's fair to pin the culture issues on Nurse necessarily, because this is just a heavier lift. Because when you have Kyle Lowry and Gasol and Danny Green and Kawhi, there's just like culture isn't even a question. You have a bunch of winners and veterans and guys that are professionals and, the correct kinds of tone setters. So maybe that just ties all the way back to great coaches are great because they have great players or the right kinds of players. And that's why it's so difficult to evaluate coaching sometimes. But 5 years as a head coach, was it 5? I think it was 5, 10 as an assistant or something close to that. Like, that things run their course, I guess. And you got to blame somebody if you're Ujiri, and he's not going to blame himself.
What seems more fait accompli very quickly, Udoka to Toronto or Nick Nurse to Houston?
I think the fact that in Woj's write-up, Udoka was the first coach's name mentioned is something we should give a lot of weight to.
I will say the fact that he also reported that the second round of interviews are beginning for the Rockets. So they're bringing back Vogel. And then like now Nick Nurse has entered the fold. It's like, so he's in the second round of interviews after not going through the first round. I might lean Nick Nurse to Houston.
Nick Nurse got a bye. He didn't have to go through the first round.
So NBA playoffs, I struggle to actually cover the NBA playoffs for this podcast because the only real way to do it seems to be like, well, let's focus on a series or team. And if we wanted to cover just one series or a singular team, we would host a regional podcast. And there's plenty of spectacular regional podcasts out there. There's a national NBA pod. I think it's just time to bounce around, look at surprises, disappointments, winners, losers, just impressions, our biggest impressions so far. And so I'll throw the talking stick to you first, since you let me go through my Raccoon diatribe. What are you thinking about right now? Is where every series is at least 2 games old, and some of them as we record this are 3 games old.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, don't apologize for the Raccoon story. I wanted that, and I got it.
This is going to be the least downloaded episode in the history of this podcast.
Is it?
Because of that 10-minute preamble?
I don't know. I think it might be what the people want. So
I timestamp it so anyone can skip it afterwards if they would like.
No, the next pod is gonna be all Raccoon talk, I think. So the first thought I had, because we've been kind of kicking this back and forth since much earlier in the playoffs. So this is a little iffier or stale, I guess, after the Warriors won Game 3 pretty handily last night against the Kings. But my first and clearest winner up to that point, and still I think gets credit, is Mike Brown, the Kings head coach. The first 2 games of that series, I think, revealed a version of the Kings that I was not sure. I should be more declarative than that I did not think existed, which is to say the defensive intensity was at a level that we had not seen. The schemes all seemed tailor-made to give the Warriors problems. The Kings did things they don't typically do, or they did not typically do during the season. The offensive rebounding, the ball pressure, the attention to detail, the turnover, like all this stuff that the Kings did to give the Warriors so much trouble in those first 2 games. I think you can tie very directly to Mike Brown. He has a little bit of an edge because he was the lead assistant for 6 years in Golden State and is better positioned than literally anybody else in the world, probably, to decide what bothers this team, because that essentially is one of his main jobs. Is as a scout, as a guy who's trying to plug holes defensively. Just what don't we like to see a team do? And then as the Kings head coach, okay, we'll just do all that. And the Kings did it exceptionally well and got up 2-0 in a series that I think pretty much everybody had Warriors in 6. I know I did.
I'd Kings in 4, just for anyone who.
Yeah, nobody checked that. Nobody looked back and checked that. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty low hanging fruit. Even if after that Game 3 loss, it's it's a little iffier. But yeah, to go up 2-0 in the way that the Kings did it, I think Mike Brown, unanimous coach of the year, by the way. So me really going out on a limb and saying Mike Brown's doing a good job. But yeah, he's a big winner for me through the first week-ish of the playoffs.
Yeah, he has to be. Do you feel any better after Game 3, where they lose against a Warriors team that doesn't have Draymond? And we saw what the Warriors did, where some of it was just the King shot so poorly from 3. He couldn't play Davion Mitchell as much. He wasn't hitting his threes. Keegan Murray's been unplayable in this series. Fox ended up having almost a triple-double, and we were talking about during the game how until the third quarter, it felt like we didn't really feel him. But do you feel better or worse about the Kings you can't feel better about it after that game, but how much worse do you feel? Does it tie into Mike Brown's done such a good job during this series? You almost like that now he has something more concrete to adjust to. Just where are you at with that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd say is banking those first 2 wins is really big because you just have such a greater margin for error as the Kings going forward. The Warriors have to win game 4, I think, to avoid what I got to believe that the Kings will win at least one more home game. The Warriors are going to have to win a road game, which has been a massive struggle. So I guess I feel a little worse because the Warriors, which we should have expected, I guess, have figured out some solutions, even shorthanded, for what the Kings have done really well. But no, I guess I'm just really impressed because I and everybody else seem to be convinced that, not to say the Kings were happy to be here, but they were overmatched. They were inexperienced. The Warriors would play better. And the Kings just put the lie to that, in a pretty substantial way through the first 2 games. So even if the Warriors go on to win the series, I would say that the Kings have made probably a better showing than anybody expected. And it's definitely not a given that the Warriors are going to that the tide has turned irreversibly. It's easy to get caught up in the recency bias stuff. But yeah, I guess I feel a little worse because they're not up 3-0, but 2-1's pretty solid, I'd say, for Brown and the Kings. What do you have a winner or a loser next? I'll throw it to you. I've been talking.
Let's go positive, followed by negative. I'm immediately drawn towards, well, I have a few. Let's go with, we have to do the Timberwolves. I have a stat for you that you already know. And I know this isn't I know transition was not a huge part of their game this season, but I just found this fascinating. Through the first 2 first halves of this series, so first and second quarter in games 1 and games 2, so 4 quarters total, the Minnesota Timberwolves have scored 3 transition points. Denver's defense has been a lot better. Zach Lowe wrote about it. You and I have talked about it. Ben Taylor did a video about how they've done some more basically he called it peel switching or scramble switching. It wasn't necessarily scram switching, but the way that they've mixed up their coverages with Nikola Jokic. Now, part of that, I think, against the Timberwolves specifically for Denver. Now, this is tying into, we have some stuff to tell about Denver, but Minnesota specifically, they are so much easier to defend with Rudy Gobert on the floor. It's not even funny. He had a really good third quarter. I think it was in game 2 where the Wolves make that raging comeback, but just there is not enough space on the floor. They are and they don't respect Minnesota shooters enough. They'll just crowd Rudy Gobert on the roll, or they will dare him. You should look at how technically wide open Rudy Gobert is on some of these rolls. The best, make a decision in space, do it. They just don't fucking care. And now you're dealing with that on top of Anthony Edwards came alive in game 2, but he's dealing with the shoulder injury. There's just no cadence to this offense. They can vary it up sometimes. And when Anthony Edwards gets by guys out of the pick and roll or just coming up in their half court, they need to get into their half court offense earlier. Towns is not having a banner series. And I guess this is a hot take and I wouldn't predict it, but I still believe they're too low on Karl-Anthony Towns. The offensive fouls are frustrating, but he is, and I don't think this is on him, to some extent still predicated on guys getting him the ball. He doesn't need them to set him up, but he's not bringing the ball up. So you need to figure out a way to, if you're going to throw it against a mismatch on the block or, have him attack outside in more. I still think he could technically be their best player, even more so than Anthony Edwards. I wouldn't predict it. And right now he's not. Bad series for him. Looming over all of this, by the way, and there's more that we can get into from the series if you would like. Looming over all of this is they don't have Jaden McDaniels. They don't have Naz Reid. And now you're going into a situation this offseason where your 5 most important players, Mike Conley, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert, have barely played together and will barely have played together. What information do you glean out of this core? And I know Anthony Edwards is young. Jaden McDaniels is young. Mike Conley is not. Rudy Gobert is not. You've now given Towns his 2nd max contract. There's urgency. And just look at how much you gave up to get Rudy Gobert in the first place. How do you know what you need, but how do you confidently continue to flesh out around this core, especially when we've kind of seen that this wasn't damaging. I was wrong about the Mike Conley trade. He's been great connective tissue for Minnesota. So let me get that out of the way. But you already had to make that huge adjustment of, okay, well, we need to get a different type of guard in here because it's not working with Rudy Gobert. And you're just not going to have the sample size of your best players on the court together on top of all that's just going wrong. And it's not, I don't think the personnel is an excuse necessarily for how much they've struggled for most of this series, mostly because you have 4 of your 5 best players on the floor in this series. And I've just been, for the most part, wildly unimpressed with how they've done in the postseason.
Yeah. So hold on. I thought you were going positive. You just shit all over the Timberwolves. What's that?
Oh, yeah, I messed up.
I was waiting for you to circle back, and somehow I was like, wow, he's really digging a deep hole. How's he going to get out of this? So Timberwolves got it, loser. Hold on. I'll respond to that by just a little bit.
Let me go for 4 minutes.
I just trust you that much. I think you're going to get all the way back around. I will say just a quick one, because this is kind of a Wolves adjacent thing. A winner is the Nuggets defense a little bit, other than the third quarter of game 2, when, as you noted, the Timberwolves caught fire and Anthony Edwards made like 19 of Anthony Edwards was like 19 of 15 from the floor. Somehow he was that good.
I mean, I've checked out.
Yeah, no, that don't double check that either. But the Nuggets, I say they're like a qualified winner because some of the location-based shot data suggests their defense has actually been bad. I think they're 15th and they're 3rd in defensive rating in the playoffs, but they're 15th, I think, in location-based effective field goal percentage, because they're still letting the Wolves get to the rim a ton, and the Wolves are finishing well there. So that's like a little bit of a red flag. But this is mostly cribbing from Zach Lowe, who wrote it up today. The Nuggets have been more aggressive in like varying their coverages. They're doing weird stuff like dropping Jokic sometimes, depending on where the screens are coming in the pick and roll. And they're crashing in an extra defender, which you don't normally do in drops because, and you pointed this out, because this ties to the Wolves. There's several shooters on Minnesota that the Nuggets are just not that concerned with. And so that's all to say that I don't know if this will continue to work for Denver, but it is encouraging that there are at least some signs tactically that Denver is working or trying to be opportunistic or being a little more clever about how are we just going to get stops, especially in the pick and roll. Because the reason that we view the West as wide open, and the reason that, everybody other than you, by the way, who thinks someone other than Denver is coming out of the West or that it's a toss up, is just because of the defense. So any positive signs for me from Denver defensively, even if there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, maybe built into it, has to make them a winner. Because I guess if you were to just sort of imagine hypothetically, say Denver was like the 10th best defense during the year, and they did this kind of thing all season, and they were more, malleable, just more creative, and just more successful, I feel like we'd think about the Western Conference a lot differently. And so with all the parity elsewhere in these series, I think Denver showing some defensive, positive signs is like, that's about as big a deal as you'd want to see from any team on any side of the ball in these playoffs. So pretty encouraging, even if I'm putting it as a qualified winner thing.
I wonder if there's something to the dunker spot. Nekias and Steve Jones had mentioned with the Kings specifically entering the playoffs that having more time to prepare for an opponent would make their defense better equipped. And I'm wondering if we could see that at play with the Nuggets here, where maybe their personnel is very rigid for a regular season setting, to where you might have hot spurts, but if you give them an opportunity to game plan for singular opponents, it becomes a lot easier. Now, I still think teams like Phoenix specifically will wind up being a terrible matchup for Denver now after the Kevin Durant trade. But I'm wondering if there's something to that with regards to Denver. I think with Sacramento, it's kind of borne out, although how much of it is, okay, Mike Brown he's coached with the Warriors, so he knows a lot of their playbook.
Yeah. All right. I got a loser for you. You ready?
I have a winner, as promised, that ties into the Nuggets. So let's start. Jamal Murray.
Yeah.
Been an absolute monster this series. Has the step back going, shooting 7 of 10 in the restricted area, making tough shots again overall as well. And then so he has that huge offensive performance in the second game. But it was even more encouraging. Like, he didn't shoot that great in the first game, 9 of 22 from the floor, 4 of 10 on threes, which, yeah, you'll take that. But like, I thought he was tough on defense, really good at making the smart pass based off how he was reading Minnesota's defense. 8 assists against 1 turnover in that game. He was kind of up and down a lot this season, which I think you would expect someone coming off an ACL injury, and then he had some knee stuff crop up during the middle of the schedule as well. If he's going to play like this, don't even forget game 2, Jamal Murray. You get game 1 Jamal Murray. You know how scary the Nuggets are all of a
Mhm.
sudden? Because like that's a Jamal Murray where it's, oh, like they can do different things defensively then too. And now you have a different way to manage a ton of your minutes. Like, and look, there have been points in this series. I think, I don't know how many, I think it was it game 2 that I saw. We know it was game 1 because they weren't playing towards the end. But like even game 2, the Nuggets feel a little bit confident in Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic not playing together. Like that's incredible. Like taking both of them off the court at the same time. That doesn't really have to do with Jamal Murray, but that might be a win for Michael Porter Jr., who's kind of another low-key winner of this. But Jamal Murray's been fantastic. And if he's going to be that kind of postseason Jamal Murray we had come to expect, like just remember what he did in the bubble. Remember his first playoff series against the Spurs? Like he like single-handedly won them. I think he might have cost them a game, but he like single-handedly won them too. If this is the version of Jamal Murray that you're just getting, the Nuggets, I know that offense isn't their primary issue, but like they just become infinitely harder to beat. If you can look at it and say, oh, we know who the second best player on the court is going to be every single game, and it's Jamal Murray.
Yeah, I mean, he had the ball in his hands a ton in that second half of game 2. It's particularly the third quarter where it just kind of turned into a shootout. It was kind of the most fun that series has been, which is not saying a lot. But so playoff Jamal Murray for sure is very much its own thing. The best part and the thing I love is that it always feels like whenever Murray does this, the other team has a guy that, you know, and it used to be Donovan Mitchell that they would just trade haymakers, and Anthony Edwards kind of got into the act a little bit in the second half of game 2. There's just nothing better. And I don't know what it is. It's like Murray's, you know, brightest moments always kind of line up with someone else who we also love to watch doing kind of the same thing. So more of that, please, both from a Nuggets perspective, because Murray matters so much, but also just from a fan perspective, because I don't know why it works out that way, but that's just what happens when Jamal Murray gets hot. I have to bring it down now because we're going to go to another guard that has had playoff success, but is not. And so one of my losers so far is Trae Young. And part of that is just, he's the best player on a team that is on the wrong end of so far what I'd say is the most lopsided series. I know the Sixers are up 3-0, but we could talk about it at some point. I can't remember if either of us has anyone from that series as a winner or loser, but the Nets have mostly competed. And so being down 3-0 is just kind of like, you know, it's a little different. The Celtics have been by far the better team than Atlanta. That is not a surprise, but just coming on the heels of, you know, Young wasn't an all-star again this year. He has now run through 2 coaches, all the damning reports from during the season about, you know, the one that really I'm never going to get out of my brain is that I think it was Sam Amick saying that if the Hawks players had to choose between Young and Nate McMillan, if they had to pick sides, they would have picked Nate McMillan's side, which is just so, I mean, that's gutting, right? And so Young in this series, 35% from the field, 23.1% from deep. He's making under 70% from the foul line, and like low key getting fouled and making free throws is a big part of his game. Just has not 14 of 40 from the field. I just like, he's got 10 turnovers to 14 assists. He just hasn't, the only scenario where the Hawks would be competitive in the series is if Young were the best player on the floor, like more than once. And he's been nowhere close to that. I think maybe you can't ever rule out he's going to have a big game at some point, but Boston's great. Boston is maybe the worst possible team for him to match up against, because there's so many good defensive guards and wings, and they all have size advantages. There's great backline help in Boston's defense. Boston's just good, but Young, this playoff performance, coming after last season's playoff performance, which was also poor, he was even worse just looking at it. So the Hawks fell in 5 to Miami in the first round of last season's playoffs, and he shot 31.9% from the field, 18.4% from deep across 5 games for Trae Young. Like, good luck. That you are not going to succeed there. I think maybe he had an ankle injury. I can't remember, but more turnovers and assists in the last playoffs. It's just like the trajectory for Trae Young's career over the last over the last year, really, but even longer than that, not great, not encouraging. And so now we're going to have to talk about the Hawks potentially trading him and all this other stuff. So I don't know how you frame him as anything but one of the bigger losers of this postseason.
I received a text message from someone during the series that reads, "No one actually respects Trae's shot anymore, and it clogs up everything. It's hard to think he's that dude," caps lock, that dude, when he's had no counter to it because he's just not a knockdown shooter. And that's a frustrating issue when he's also a defensive zero. And that, I'm reading that because you mentioned the Trae Young trade stuff. I've kind of dismissed it, and I'll still mostly dismiss it, but that could become very real over this offseason. And I don't buy the whole timing of that report just before the play-in about the Hawks' new front office having the agency to move him. That's either like, I don't want to say outdated info, but info that people were holding on to for a while, or it's just not coming from the Hawks. There's no reason for Trae or the Hawks to leak that now.
Yeah.
But I do think it becomes more interesting. And we had a friend of the podcast, Rhett Bauer, was proposing like a framework of Trae plus what to Brooklyn for Mikal Bridges plus what. And I ultimately think that I don't know if either team would do that because I'm assuming Brooklyn wants to kind of reset its culture after the whole KD, Kyrie Irving, James Harden fiasco. And also just, I think that skews too far towards all secondary creators for Atlanta with DeJounte and Mikal Bridges. Like I guess do you consider DeJounte Murray a 1A passer? I don't. And like Trae can still do that. And Mikal Bridges isn't there yet. And then you have Bogey, and you could throw Spencer Dinwiddie in there. I thought it was an interesting thought exercise. I'm not dumping all over the idea from Rhett. Which is why I'm bringing this up. It's the prelude to, it's really hard to find no-brainer Trae Young destinations. And that's why I think that Atlanta ultimately is, because he's still an offensive force in theory, but like you have to figure out how to tailor make the offense around him or defense around him to make this work. But that thought process doesn't mean as much when he's playing like this on offense and can be so frustrated or neutralized, even if you don't want to say easily, even if you don't want to say consistently, as semi-frequently as we've now seen in postseasons.
No, I think the idea of trading for Young it's like a really franchise altering decision because you have to change everything about your operation if Trae Young is on your team. He's not someone Trae Young is eminently not scalable, like, right? Because if he's on the team, you're embracing extreme heliocentrism. You're going to have to cover for him defensively at every other position. And you have these leadership questions and you have these postseason flop questions, and which is, stem largely out of the point that you made, or that your anonymous texter made, about how if he's not going to be someone that just wins you games offensively by himself, then like, what are you getting? And it seems pretty clear. Like, this is me inferring things too. I don't think guys like to play with him. I think you've had the John Collins stuff a couple of years ago. You have the siding with Nate McMillan. There's just a lot of evidence that he's not fun or easy to play with. And he's also not been productive lately too. So like, it's such a big alteration for a guy that it doesn't seem worth it. And now we're talking about Trae at like the absolute nadir of his sort of Q rating over the last, several months or years. But like, concocting a trade for him that is defensible and makes sense, and finding a partner that's willing to take on all the minuses for some of the pluses that might be there is really tough.
And to be clear, I also think it was, in Trae's defense, it was oversold how much he struggled during the regular season. It was an early season thing, and then he wound up putting 27 and 10 on reasonable efficiency. If that's not going to translate to the playoffs, is where it becomes an issue. And you could say, okay, it's Boston. That's a terrible matchup for him, but the road through the East as of right now is going to run through Boston for quite some time, it looks like. And I don't know, when I look at this roster, I don't know what the answer is. And part of that is because what we've seen this series specifically doesn't feel like a roster construction issue so much as a Trae's offensive profile issue.
Yeah.
And so is he going to be able to make defenses pay for now playing that far off him? Is that a function of they also know what spots like Trae and DeJounte Murray like to get to anyway inside the arc? As I don't know what the response is and what even the next evolution of Trae would be. I think we know what it is. Can you get him moving away from the ball?
Yeah,
but he's kind of smaller and just never done that. I don't know if you can go that route. It'll be interesting to see. Quinn Snyder might be the guy to do it just because of how his early onset Utah offense looked.
Yeah. So I would say if they don't trade Young this offseason, which still seems like kind of a long shot, I guess, even if the front office has the green light, if we get into next season and Quinn Snyder has the summer to kind of set the culture, install the offense, install the style of play he wants that he had in Utah, and it doesn't look different offensively, or Young continues to be unwilling to change how he plays, like, then we got real problems, because then Young is the only kind of lever to pull left for the Hawks. So we're going to know, we're going to have an answer, in November, I think.
I'm going to go positive this time. I promise.
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Can you finish second in defensive player of the year voting and still be underrated? I'm asking for a friend.
I have a feeling that is very much possible.
Brook Lopez might be the most underrated player in the NBA because, and I will say, his defensive value, first of all, his value is so often boiled down to look what he's doing as a rim protector, which I think it's not insulting, but it's an oversimplification of his actual defense. Where, yeah, look at what he's doing as a rim protector. But like, this is someone, when you look, he knows how to like use angles and like body bends to like come out of what you would call his wheelhouse or comfort zone and hold up. Like, he's, if you don't want to call him matchup proof, he's not someone that is going to be played off the floor. Like, yes, Miles Turner is more matchup proof. You know who's more matchup proof than Kristaps Porzingis? Brook Lopez. So like I can't say enough about what he's able to do defensively. And it holds up when Milwaukee's other best defenders aren't on the court. You pull Giannis off, the Bucks still rank in the 9th percentile of defensive efficiency. You pull Jrue Holiday off, I believe it's the same story last time I had checked. We go into game 2 against Miami. This is where the underrated stuff comes in. When we talk about Brook Lopez, and maybe not we, but I'm sure at least I'll say I've probably been guilty of it at some point, boil down his offensive value to like, look at how important that is to Milwaukee spacing. You put someone who can shoot threes around Giannis and how that works. He's not taking like 8 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. In game 2, he takes 1. Without Giannis, the Bucks decided we're going to play through Brook Lopez very early on. And you look at his ability to get, he's not going through these like, he used to be more of a, we talk about how much his shot profile has changed. Even when you're looking at his inside the arc attempts, they're so much different from how they were earlier on in his career. Like, you're not actually posting him up. He's getting absurd position. And then on the catch, he's just turning, throwing up a push shot, cutting for a dunk. And the fact that he could put the ball on the floor and go outside in, I think he only had one of those in game 2, but he's a 7-footer at the age of 35 who's just like, yeah, I can pump and drive, whatever. That's fine. He is. And then in game 2, he had, 25 points on 12 of 17 shooting, doesn't make a 3 throughout that entire game. And it was just I don't want to say that it was the epitome of Brook Lopez's value, but it was just like this reminder he does so much. And I think even you look at this series, Milwaukee's defense has actually been not great overall. The Heat are making jumpers, which is just absurd. Also, Brook, though, has not, when you look at the rim protection numbers, those haven't been great for him. He's kind of nailed the Bam Adebayo assignment, though. The Heat as a team are averaging 0.92 points per possession when Brook Lopez registers as a defender on Bam Adebayo. Like, you get in the shot profile, like, Bam Adebayo has more turnovers than assists in those, but because this is measured in partial possessions, I like to just go, I think the team's performance is the most accurate way to view it, even though it's probably not perfectly telltale. Brook Lopez is 35, headed towards free agency, and he's just a monstrous winner because of the recognition he gets for his defense, for how good he's still on offense. And I think when we talk about bigs who can stretch the floor, protect the rim, not be played off the floor on defense, and then also just open up so many different options and shots inside the arc, you can count those bigs on one hand. Yep. There's Miles Turner. There's who's after that?
Jaren Jackson, maybe.
Jaren Jackson Jr. Who else? I mean, Anthony Davis he's not on that list, right? Like, because he's not hitting.
No, the shooting element's not there. Other than that one time in the bubble.
Karl-Anthony Towns doesn't bring the rim protection. There might be 4 or 5 guys. Brook Lopez is one of them. And I don't know if you have anything to add to this. My final thought would be, it would not shock me. I know the cap is going up, but like, this is someone who could get $20+ million per year.
Yes. On a short-term deal for sure. Just because, there's not really any drop off. And this is a guy that, was it last year that he missed all the time with back surgery? Like, for a guy that age, that's that big, and he's better than he was a year ago. No, you're totally right. I think the not being able to be played off the floor thing is the most impressive part of all this, because for a long time, even when Lopez was doing a lot of this, there was this, well, what if the Bucks just have Giannis play the 5? Imagine what that might get them, and that's just clearly wrong. That's just not, that is not the best version of the Bucks. I was easy to think so, because that's how every team kind of wanted to operate, when it was clear that, this is the Warriors thing because Draymond Green at the 5, like, how do we compete with that? Everybody's looking for the switchable center that can kind of do a bunch of stuff. And well, maybe that's Giannis. No, it's not Giannis. Giannis could do that, doesn't make the Bucks better than having Lopez out there. And I would say too that the Adebayo matchup is really interesting because, and it's actually kind of weirdly a good one for Lopez because Adebayo is not a guy that is going to stretch him all the way out to the 3-point line. Right. So he can hang in his drop a little bit and worry for sure. Adebayo is going to make, 14 to 18 footers and get in the lane and push up floaters. But like the Bucks would love it for opponents to take those shots, right? Like that's part of what they want you to do. So he is positioned to succeed, but we haven't really seen, correct me if I'm wrong, the matchup or the team that you kind of look at Lopez on the floor and wonder, well, how's he going to hang out there? That just doesn't happen for him.
Even if the Clippers do what they did, and I think we'll get to the Clippers in a second, to close that game against them, where they had 5 guards on the court, essentially. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, Brook Lopez could totally play. That's
right. He's good. He's fine. I have another winner, and it's at the same position, and some recency bias in this because we just watched this game last night together. This is Kevon Looney, and if you follow the Warriors enough, you do understand that he is sort of, he's not on the level of the Steph, Clay, Draymond, triumvirate in terms of these are the guys that won us the title. I think probably when, looking back at it, you'll think of Andre Iguodala even before you think of Kevon Looney because he was there for all of it and had bigger roles. But so Looney against the Kings playing without Draymond Green just goes out and gets, I think in the first quarter, he had 3 offensive boards, 7 total, 4 assists, didn't score. I think he had 2 points in the game. I'm not looking at this right now, but he ended up with 20 boards. He really offered proof of concept. And this was a major discussion point for us. And I think it should be going forward for if the Warriors, it almost doesn't matter who the one big is. It can be Looney or it can be Draymond Green. The best versions of this have featured Draymond Green, but Looney last night was just one of the keys to unlocking the spacing that made the Kings defense less effective. It freed up shooters. It freed up the lane. It allowed the Warriors to get at least, if not 3-level scoring, because they're not going to shoot a ton of mid-rangers, but 2-level, because they were having a hell of a time trying to get to the bucket for clean looks, to get into space. And Looney very much was the key for that because you can give him the ball 23 feet from the basket and he's going to make good decisions. He's going to set good screens. He's going to just be the guy that enables the Warriors to be the best version of themselves. So I just think, and he's doing this all while playing basically heads up with Domantas Sabonis, who's one of the best offensive centers in the league. And he's getting involved in tons of actions because the Kings run so much through Sabonis. So I just think Looney is someone that the Warriors all talk about as he's the heart of the team. He's like the adult in the room. He's so poised. He's so sacrificed so much. He comes off the bench, gets benched in, huge playoff games from the starting lineup after starting all year. No problem. Just a Kevon Looney celebration is in order. I think there's not a team that he wouldn't help, that's all. But this particular Warriors team, I think he just proved that he just matters a ton. He's been incredible when they've most needed it, which is maybe the best thing you can say about a role player.
And that could tie into, I don't want to call him a winner or a loser, but I think this could tie into the larger discussion. I think the Warriors are a winner because they've discovered, well, look at what can happen when we have so much space. Mm-hmm. Just from that game. I think there's something to take away. Is Draymond Green at all a loser because of this? It's proof of concept, I think, more for what it can do to open up the offense and help them put pressure on the basket. But is there a little bit of, okay, if he really left in free agency, how much worse would they be? And I want to say I still skew because of what he does defensively. Yeah. I think this is more proof of concept of the type of lineups they need to run out, but is he at all a loser because of what they do in game 3 without him?
I mean, just the fact that we're having to kind of think about this a little bit is kind of a bad look for him. And that's just independent of having to think about all the give and take of the whole Draymond experience, which, go back to the punch. I think you can tie that to Jordan Poole. And we've talked a little bit about some of the younger guys maybe being unhappy. I think a lot of that is Draymond. I think if nothing else, I think Draymond comes off looking maybe less integral, at least for now. He's peak Draymond Green is the best defensive player I think I've ever seen, and they don't win the 4 titles without him. They might have 5 if he hadn't gotten suspended in the 2016 finals. We've belabored that, but like, it's a bad look for him unless he views what happened with Looney as the only big. And his takeaway is, maybe I don't need to hunt these high risk backdoor cut bounce passes. Maybe I don't need to try to do, really high, difficult hand. Like, Looney is a low mistake guy offensively, and he's just out there to get in front of bodies and make the easy play, make the easy pass. Steve Kerr always talks about let's hit singles. Kevon Looney is a 350 hitter that hits a lot of singles just over and over. And Draymond Green is a little more like high variance. The highs are high, the lows are low. The mistakes sometimes with the passes are terrible, and those killed the Warriors in the first 2 games.
Yeah.
So maybe if Draymond looks at that and just kind of understands, we don't need to work quite as frenetically on offense to get what we need against the Kings, and Looney kind of proved that. But you said it, defensively, Looney is not on Draymond's level, versatility wise, anticipation wise. Looney's just solid, is in the right place, knows what to do, takes hits, can all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's not unfair to say Green is a bit of a loser from this first round, just because the Warriors just kicked ass without him. Like, how do you spin that another way?
In the interest of moving us along here too, since we said we weren't going to go that much longer, over an hour, I'm on to a loser. And I think this is by default. I want to make this clear. I think if you look at, it's the Clippers are a loser. I'm like burying the lead there. I think if you look at how tightly they ended up playing the Suns without Kawhi and Paul George on Thursday night, that's kind of a big deal. Downsizing, maybe finding something there in the second half. An actual loser from this series, by the way, is Robert Covington. How can that dude not see the floor? They talked about him entering the rotation in game 3. He proceeded to log 3 minutes and 38 seconds. But the Clippers, it's just like, it's cool that Norman Powell was able to go off for 42, and he just does what he does at every single stop and is valuable there. But now you're risking, and let's call them a tentative loser, because no one really expected them to beat Phoenix without Paul George. And the fact that they won game 1 kind of opened the door of, okay, like, is there something here? But like, now you're just going through another postseason where, yes, there's inbuilt excuses that are viable. You don't have your 2 best players for at least one of the games. You don't have your second best player for the entire series. But how many times, like, that's unfortunate. And it's also just their reality at this point after all these years. And so I feel like you're in a position where you have to start asking, and I don't mean to turn this into like, well, one of the stars needs to be moved. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but like, you're kind of finding these gems in Russell Westbrook's defense whenever he's playing Kevin Durant, apparently. I think his rim pressure, even when it's chaotic and he's committing turnovers, and his inability to just finish consistently at the basket is wild. Like, some of them are just really high quality looks and they're just not going in. But they've found things. They've unearthed gems. They have a lot of talent on this roster, and yet the path forward still feels so hazy, because it's not, we need to get this type of player. It's, we need one of our stars to last an entire playoff series, and they can't. And it's unfair. So I want to make that clear. I'm not, Kawhi soft. No, like, Kawhi was dealing with his injury in game 2, apparently, when he was just, I noticed almost no difference from him between game 1 and 2. The dude is so good, and he's been a top 5-7 player since December. So you even get that extended of a stretch from him, and it just can't last another, not even, we say like another 16 wins. They probably weren't going to win the chip anyway, but like, even just to get through the series, whether you win or lose it. And I just don't know what to make of it, because it's cool. Like, again, they have so much talent, and I think they've discovered things about themselves. And I also think that they've not discovered enough. I'm inclined to give Ty Lue the benefit of the doubt, but I'm always kind of like, before game 3, it's, why isn't Terrence Mann playing more minutes? And even he logs fewer than 26 in game 3. And then it's, well, why doesn't Robert Covington see the floor at all? Like, I think, I feel very confident in saying this. I know it's a hot take. I would rather have Robert Covington play than Mason Plumlee. I like, everyone sit down, brace yourselves. I hope everyone's okay. Why not try it? But again, Ty Lue is so smart and such a good coach that, is there something else there? But the Clippers feel like a loser, because they're just never going to have the run with this team that they need to have. And I don't know how they go about inoculating themselves, protecting themselves against this happening all over again.
Yeah, I think I would also add that we are kind of the collective NBA fandom or whatever are losers in this, because I'm personally annoyed by this, because I just did not have any fun talking about the Clippers this year, because the only thing you could really say with any certainty was, well, we'll just see when we see, because they've rested guys. They're the load management kings. We won't really know until we get to the playoffs. And if those guys are healthy, I like their chances against anyone. I mean, so many people kept the Clippers in the high-end contender class, even as they were just being really boring and not winning a ton of games, because you got Kawhi and Paul George and you got all these, wings and guards and everything. Like, that might work. They might be contenders. They might come out of the West, and I'm annoyed because we're going to have to do it again next year, because they're not going to break these two, Kawhi and PG, up.
Realistically, how do you? Like, what do you expect to get for them? And
they're not.
What is the direction after you give up? 50 games of Kawhi is better than 82 of whoever you're trading Kawhi for.
Except from our perspective, because all that means is we go into the next playoffs and they're the 5 seed or whatever, and we just have to do this whole dance again. It's like, it's not again, you're right. It's not an indictment of the roster building theory. Like, it makes sense, but it's just, again, we're going to do this again, where we just don't know what they are. And it will all depend on if they're healthy, and they probably won't be healthy. And eventually this experiment's just going to hit the half-decade mark, and it's going to expire naturally. But that sucks. I don't want to do that again. You couldn't really analyze the Clippers at all this season in a big picture way, because you just didn't have, the full picture to look at. So yeah, that's a good call. I have another quick loser to hit that we landed on earlier today, and that is the rules of NBA basketball, because I would say the most important thing about rules is you have to know what they are, and they have to stay the same, and everyone has to understand how they're going to be enforced and interpreted. That's why we have rules. So it takes the guesswork out of, what do we do in situation X when thing Y happens? I don't know, Dan. I don't know what the rules are, because Draymond Green gets kicked out for getting his ankle grabbed and stomping on Sabonis. Not that hard, I would add. The bruised sternum thing felt a little suspect, as did him writhing on the floor. Green's at fault. Could have fallen down. Could have drawn a foul, but he gets ejected, gets suspended, and then compounding. So I don't know. And then we're considering we're considering Green's history of violence. That's my interpretation of it. We're considering him barking at the crowd after the fact. We're also acknowledging probably the fact that the commissioner was in the audience as a factor in that. I know you talked about this. Had to be, right?
Yeah.
But like, okay, so now we have all these new parameters that factor into suspension decisions. That's one. And then in this Nets Sixers game, we get Joel Embiid straight up kicking a guy, which, by the way, has gotten Draymond Green in trouble many, many times. It's a flagrant 1, right? Do I have that right? He's kicking at Nick Claxton from the ground.
So the reason why he only got a flagrant 1 is that his aim isn't as good as Draymond's.
Right. Yeah. Got to work on it. You hit the leg, you're fine. It's a flagrant 1. I mean, if you're talking about like, there's no place in basketball for that feels like one of those moments. If we're gonna, I don't know how we're gonna differentiate stomps and kicks if the landing spot matters. So that's one thing. James Harden gets kicked out with a flagrant 2 for a cup check, which, like, yeah, don't do that either. But measured against one another, I'm not sure how you determine what's worse. And then Nick Claxton gets tossed for flexing after dunks a couple times,
being too skinny. Yeah, that was body shaming,
right? So, okay, so that's a factor now too. What's your body mass index? What's your body fat? Are you how yoked do you look? Are you in a cut or are you in a bulk phase? I don't know. Does that factor into getting thrown out of game? So, like, we're making a halfway joke of this, but like, this is the playoffs. We got to know what the standards are, and they can't change, and they can't be arbitrarily enforced, or at least hazily enforced. Like, we need to have much more clear criteria of what's going to get you a flagrant 1, a flagrant 2, a technical, kicked out of game, suspended. Like, I just feel like it would be not, look, we all want the games to be decided by the players, especially in the playoffs. So I'm not, and maybe that just means we err on the side of not throwing anybody out, or we just try to find ways but then that's also hazy because you're leaving it up to referee discretion. I just don't know. I don't like this. I like rules to make sense. I like to know what they are. So that's all I'm saying about the rules. The rules are the big loser because they're missing their most important element, which is clarity and consistency. That's all.
I don't have anything to add other than that I perfectly agree with you. It's sort of just like, and the charge debate is
Oh,
more,
we didn't even talk about that.
yeah, is more fascinating to me because I'm not going to get mad at people who say ban the charge immediately after we watch John Moran or Giannis Antetokounmpo get undercut and injured and then miss games in the playoffs. I actually respect the people who are like, well, think about the offensive rating if you did that less in that moment. That's just whatever. But you can't ban the charge.
No.
And because those people who are actually about the offensive rating are right. It's not the moment for it, in my opinion. You need to, we talked about this on just going to keep plugging that the Hardwood Knock, or do we call it, because of the way that it happened, Grant Hughes and the Hardwood Knocks Collective, like, do we put your name in the front of it now?
Sure.
But we talked about this on that stream, though, is my point. You said it, extend the restricted area. I think that's kind of a simple solution, right? I'm not about, I've seen a lot of the takes of, well, guys should be able to stop and pop. And like, no, because now, you're kind of already saying that some of the teams skew too homogenous, or that teams are obsessed with a certain type of player. You don't think that's going to aid in their obsession of a certain type of player then? So it's just, I don't like that idea. And I understand why you can't ban the charge, even though that would probably be the safest outcome. Extend the restricted area and at least, regardless of where the restricted area is, please be more consistent with how you're calling charges in the first place.
I think that, yeah, I mean, obviously can't take credit for the extending the restricted area. A lot of people, every time this comes up, that's like, oh yeah, let's just do that. That's the most obvious solution.
You said
if
it first.
You don't want guys getting undercut at the basket. I think the other thing you could do is just have the officiating be really, really, not biased is the wrong word, but really purposeful in making sure that if the offensive player has like initiated the takeoff, has gathered the ball, and you are not already standing there like reading the newspaper as a defender, like you need to be there so early, because what you want is to avoid guys just running people over. And like, I mean, NBA athletes are the best in the world. It's really hard for them to just make a movement or change their takeoff angle or do whatever. The Euro step is the reason the Euro step exists, is to work around the charge or position defense. But like, it's so easy for guys to slide in and just barely be there, and the guy's already taken off or close to it. Like, we got to get that out of the game. I think, the charge circle movement is clearly the easiest solution, but just making it so that if there's any question at all, it's almost like a tie goes to the runner thing. There's any question about, was the guy there early enough? The answer's got to be no. No, he wasn't. It's a block. Like, just discourage the slide in late, I think would go a long way towards getting the undercuts out of the game. Man, we've really gone in on the rules. I don't know who's here for that, but I am.
What are the rules?
What are
they? On our curiosity of
nobody knows.
I know you have another winner, and I have a winner loser I'll get to really quickly. I think yours deserves like an actual conversation, but my last winner, but one that stood out to me, Derrick White. I think it was clear that he was Boston's third best or third most important player this season. Through 2 games of the Atlanta Hawks, just more aggressive on offense than he's ever been. The jumper's falling at probably an unsustainably high clip, but the fact that he's comfortable using pull-ups or just firing off the catch, in addition to the way that he's moving without the ball and able to get to the basket, he's shooting like 80% inside 5 feet for the series, where he's already taken 14 shots. It's definitely not to say, I think, though, wouldn't the answer to this question last year have been, who's their third most important player, or even entering this season? It would have been RW3 or Marcus Smart, right?
Yeah. Or even Horford.
And maybe even Horford. And now it's just very clearly Derrick White. Yeah. And I'll phrase it this way. And I know this is spicy, but I'll throw him in the Aaron Gordon tier, like that discussion. If you set the over-under at 0.5 career all-star appearances for Derrick White, I'm not sure that I'm taking the under. I'll say that much.
That is spicy. That's exciting. I'm interested in that. I mean, sorry to jump in, but like, there was a time when White was with the Spurs where it wasn't clear he was this kind of player, like the ultimate glue guy.
Spurs fans, whenever you say something nice about Derrick, like, no one ever talked about him when he was in San Antonio.
We talked about him all the time. You referenced it. He had some great playoff moments. He had one of the best playoff dunks in the last 10 years.
Honestly, I thought he played for the Rockets. I didn't even know he was on this.
Who's Derrick White? Anyway, continue.
That's all I have on Derrick White. If you have anything to add on, and
he's great.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm gonna take the over on 0.5 All-Star appearances. I'm feeling spicy.
I'm gonna take the under just to shit on your point, but no, I don't know. If Aaron Gordon is considered a fringe All-Star, which he kind of was for a while this year, I don't know if I bought that, but yeah, White is in that class, if not above it, just because of there's nothing he's really not capable of doing on either side of the floor. So yeah, he's been awesome.
And that's the other thing, is just the defense. Is I think we both had him on second team, and I saw after Zach Lowe had him on his first team.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, I mean, like that's a hell of a player. And my last loser that I'll get to, and this could be outdated or it could be exacerbated by the time someone listens to this. It's the Knicks offense in general. I think you could point to a bunch of things. Emmanuel Quickley has not been good, and his playing time is reflected as much. Maybe the Knicks need to give him more playing time so that he can get in a better rhythm. He saw some shots go in at the end of game 2. The Cavs they're brutalizing Jalen Brunson at both ends of the floor. They're just trapping him on offense. I like that he was aggressive to start last game, but then I didn't really love his shot selection. I'd like to see him. He's best when he's kind of that ball mover connector while also being the primary scorer, and he hasn't found that balance. Credit Cleveland. Then they're really going after him at the other end. Julius Randle he just doesn't look like he's moving the same. It just, to me, I can't
which of course, right? Of course.
Right. It feels more like the defensive effort was there in game 1, wasn't there in game 2. I'm just wondering how much of that was, I'm not trying to make excuses, but like, it didn't seem like he was moving the same on offense either. RJ Barrett, I think I said this in my overreactions to every game 1 that I did on a solo podcast this week. If you told me the Knicks could trade RJ Barrett into someone's cap space this summer, I might consider it, which means that I've come from, I don't know if you should include him in the Donovan Mitchell trade to here. So I want to make it clear, this is not a serious take, but this guy on offense, I think he's actually been fine defensively this series, bordering on really good in game 1. And that's running counter to what we saw through the entire regular season, where he was closing out like he had weights on his shoes. The screen navigation got worse from the other year. I think he's still fine on ball in general. Generally, the offense is just, he doesn't have a trademark skill. His trademark skill is the idea of his skill being getting to the basket. And when he does get there, he can't finish. And he's just not getting there as often as you think, because he bails out. He takes these fadeaways. I saw Stefan Bondi of the New York Daily News, like, tweeted this out before. And then Jonathan Macri of Knicks Film School, which is just one of the best podcasts out there, by the way. I'll shout them out, even though I hate their producer, Andrew Claudio, is a fucking schmuck. Just kidding. I love you, Claudio. But like, they cover the league the right way, where they do everything from transactions to X's and O's to interacting with fans. They cover every nook and cranny of it. I love the versatility. So quick shout out there. But RJ Barrett had said in that comment, and Jonathan Macri, John highlighted it for me, which is why I listened to the clip at all, about how his like turnarounds that he likes to get to and we're normally falling, we're not. RJ Barrett shot 36.7% on turnaround jumpers this year. If that's considered shots I normally make, is all I have to say. And so, like, I'm not ready to pour one out for the Knicks offense, but that's just something they need to consider. I think they're also general spacing viability. They did a good job with their 3-point volume as the season went on, but I think they need more caps lock shooters on this roster. It's something for them to monitor over the offseason. Yeah.
And look, I'd echo what you said. The Cavs defense is a tough defense to get going against. I think that's got to be factored in. But yeah, it's not great. The Barrett stuff in particular, like it's one of those things where you may still be able to say, well, but he's still young.
Right.
We're almost out of that being like a viable rebuttal to any criticism of him.
I will say he probably needs to be traded for his own good at this point, because it's just the plug and play aspect of his game isn't coming along. And I guess with Quickley there, it's even just like, you don't want to give him agency over the bench units in heavier volume. And Tibbs is going to do that anyway, just the way he's going to stagger his players. So for him, I think he needs to be somewhere with better spacing, and that's going to allow him to play through, I don't even want to say mistakes, but failures, and that there won't be as high of stakes ascribed to the outcome of his performances, because the Knicks are trying to win now. And look, they should. I just don't think with Jalen Brunson and then Julius Randle's renaissance plus the emergence of Emmanuel Quickley, I don't know if this is the environment anymore for his offensive game to grow. just because he shot like -5% on wide open 3-pointers for most of this season. And so like he doesn't even have the plug and play aspect of the offense down right now.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I got a quick winner here. Which is my last one that I have. Just the KD Booker pairing. I think it's not really a surprise because, from the second Durant got traded and before that, the take on Durant was always that like, there's just really no scenario that he doesn't fit into offensively because he's not someone that has to dominate the ball. He has a ton of gravity off of it. If you need him to score as a spot up 3-point shooter, I don't know why you would ever use him that way. He could do that. He's going to attract a ton of attention out there. He's obviously one of the best mid-range shooters ever. He can get to the basket. His defense was awesome this year. Just totally a guy that you could integrate anywhere. And Booker, there are no questions about Durant fitting. Booker had very few, relatively speaking, too, because he's got a lot of that in him as well. And I think it was pretty clear that those two respected each other a lot. But like just looking at this series in particular, Booker goes for 45 in game 3, and all he does is credit Durant for opening up space for him to do that. I mean, there's several quotes out there about him going to Durant and saying like, you made that happen for me, basically. And Durant saying like, I don't know about that. I think you're just probably really good. So the pairing seems to work exceptionally well. Booker, by the way, so he had 38 in game 2. He's really slacking in game 2, but he's been over 60% from the field in both of those games, in 2 and 3. Durant has had at least 25 in all 3 of their games to this point, shot over 50% from the field for the series, and he's not even hitting threes yet. I mean, Durant's 3 ball has been kind of MIA so far. The fact that like that's not a problem really is, I think, also speaks to the value he has offensively alongside Booker. And then Booker pointed to this too. If the adjustment then is for the Clippers, well, we got to make sure Booker doesn't get loose. Good luck, because if you send any extra attention at Booker, now you have one of the greatest scorers of all time in Durant that is no longer being, face guarded 30 feet from the basket, and he gets to go nuts. So, I mean, not a shock, but that pairing, even if the Suns don't go as far as maybe they hope to this year, like as a foundation, just get a couple more depth pieces around that core of, forget Ayton, forget Paul. It's just the Booker Durant duo. Like that's just gonna work. There's just no scenario where that doesn't work, I think. And the last couple of games have really borne that out because Booker's gone nuts, and he's great. Booker's one of the best 3-level scorers in the league. He's awesome. But a lot of that has to do with Durant also being out there with him, and neither of them seems to have a problem with one or the other, getting what they can get because the attention just can't. There's not enough defensive attention to like properly cover both of those guys.
The only thing I would add is if you went through an exercise, let's go through the exercise. We can pick 5 all-NBA caliber players you could put anywhere with any personnel. There's still going to be 1 all-NBA caliber, while 2 elevating the players or the system in which and around which they exist. Who is on that list?
I mean, Durant for sure, right? And
Steph,
Booker. But I think
that's
Booker,
Steph, Booker, Durant. I think Jokic would be 4. I don't know who the 5th would be.
Yeah, you could just say Giannis because you're going to get all the defense.
I think with Giannis and Embiid, you have to still kind of build ultra specifically around.
Sure, you do need the shooting, and you need that's fair. Yeah, that's the thing. It's difficult to come up with those types of guys.
Is it Dame? Would it be Tatum?
Tatum's a good one.
We'll go with Tatum as the 5th there then, or is it? I would say Kawhi, but the availability matters because it might be Kawhi.
Yeah.
So 11 of 10, no notes on that. That is going to be a scary duo, even if they don't win it all this year.
You like how I go out on limbs to close these things out and just say things like Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are a pretty good combo?
Right. Let's finish with the last hot take. The Sixers are up 3-0 on the Nets in the first round.
The Sixers look good.
I'm just going to state like actual truths that there's no room for opinion.
We don't talk about facts enough. All right. You got anything else, or should I take us out?
No, this was already way longer than we wanted to, but you asked for the raccoon story. So
I regret nothing. Thanks everybody for listening. Make sure if you're enjoying this to rate, review, subscribe, like, follow all of our social media at GT_Hughes, at Dan Favale, at HardwoodKnocks. Give us 5 stars, tell your friends and enemies, and we will close as always with a shout out to the one and only Frank Ntilikina, an apology to Jared Allen, and just a farewell to all the raccoons that used to live in Dan's house.